So this is a game I played on chess.com. It was a turn-based sort of 3 days per move game, played over the internet. My opponent was playing black and had a grade of about 1450. I started the game with pawn e4, perhaps the most natural starting move, gaining ground in the centre, controlling the squares on f5 and d5, and developing the bishop, which can now move out along this diagonal. Black responded with e5, with a similar idea. My second move, knight f3, developing a minor piece and threatening to take the pawn in the centre, and black responded with knight c6, developing a piece and defending the pawn on e5. At this point, white has, of course, many options. He can play bishop b5, the Spanish game, threatening to take this knight and hence win the pawn on e5. He can play bishop c4, the Italian game. He can play knight c3, leads to the four knights. But recently I've been playing the Ponziani, which starts with pawn to c3. And I like this because it takes people out of the sort of openings that they're used to playing. And the obvious move, or I think the best move for black now in this position, is knight f6. And later I'll post some games where black does that, and we'll see what happens. But in this case, black made a mistake. I think he played pawn to f6. Now this has at least two problems. The first problem is it's exposed this diagonal f7 to b3 and this diagonal f7 to h5, and it's seriously weakened the king's position. But perhaps more seriously, it takes away the natural square f6 for this knight, the king's knight. And you'll see later black has difficulty later in developing his pieces. I thought about playing in this position bishop c4, and that indeed might be the best way of exploiting the weaknesses in black's move. But I played actually pawn to d4, a safe, natural developing move, now freeing up the bishop on c1. And of course I'm now threatening to move this pawn on d4 forward further to d5, forcing the knight back and leading to a very cramped game for black. Now in this position, d5 for black wouldn't be a bad move, but black actually played d6. It seems quite a natural move, defending the pawn on e5, but in fact it's further cramping black's position. You can see now this bishop on f8 only has one square to move to, which is e7, and if the bishop does move there, then where is this knight on g8 going to move to? So you can see that black's already starting to have a problem of how to get his pieces into the game. I thought now of playing d5 straight away and forcing the knight back, but I decided in the end to play bishop c4, threatening to take this knight here perhaps, and rook takes knight, and then black can't castle on this side. It also develops another piece, and it means I can castle king's side next go if I want to. Black played a good move, I think, bishop g4, developing this piece and pinning this knight against the white queen. At this point I thought about queen b3, threatening next move, bishop takes knight, rook takes bishop, queen takes rook, or even threatening next go, bishop to f7, check. But if you look at this carefully, black has knight a5. Now I'm not going to go into the full variations. You can do this yourself if you want to, but it turns out that does rather blunt white's attack. So I didn't play queen b3, and instead I played bishop e3. I did this because after pawn takes, and then you have bishop takes knight, if the queen was to take that bishop, this pawn in the center will be lost. Therefore I might have to take with this pawn on g2, and that would seriously weaken my kingside pawn structure. So I played bishop e3. I'm not convinced it's the best move, but that's what I played. Probably d5 would have been the best move in this position, forcing the knight back and winning space. And black now played queen d7, and at this point I'm thinking, well, it looks like black's going to castle on the queen side. And normally in this position I would castle myself. It's a risky strategy to castle later in the game. However, in this case, the way that black's pieces are hemmed in, the knight on g8 can hardly move, the bishop on f8 can hardly move, I felt the king could remain in the center a little bit longer, and I actually played b4, looking to play a4 and then later b5, and storming this queenside pawn formation, assuming that black does castle queenside. But it turns out that b4, the move I played, is a mistake, and it might be a good idea now to pause this video and have a look yourself and see if you can see the move that black can make that exploits my b4 move. Well, it turns out that the pawn on c3 is overburdened defending both the pawn on b4 and the pawn on d4. And so, for example, black can play e takes d4, and I can play bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, pawn takes knight, d5, and when my bishop retreats, let's say to there, black has bishop takes b4, the pawn that was left unprotected, check, and that's clearly better for black. I didn't see this, and luckily for me, neither did black, and black played instead g5. Well, this is a particularly strange move, I think. It's not at all clear what this pawn move achieves. Perhaps black's thinking that we're going to castle opposite sides, white on the king side, black on the queen side, and we're going to basically each throw our pawns forward at the opponent's king. But of course it's far from clear yet that white is going to castle on the king side, when in fact it turns out I don't. So at this point I played knight to d2, knight b, d2, developing my final minor piece. At this point e takes d4 would still be a good move for black, and what I should have played in this position was basically d5, which takes away that threat on d4 and forces the knight back to maybe to e7, which was seriously cramp black's style. However, I played knight b d2, and at this point black again missed the pawn capture on d4 and castled on the queen's side. At this point I played a4. I can't play b5 straight away because the knight would go to a5, which is a very nice position, stopping this pawn moving forward and also attacking the bishop on c4. So I need to play a4, a5, followed by b5. And at this point black played pawn to f5. Well, this is a mistake, of course, and one of the things you should always do playing chess, and I don't always do this myself, but one should always do it, is see if the opponent has any captures or any checks, and see if you have a response. There aren't many pieces or pawns that white can capture. I can play bishop takes knight, rook takes bishop, that's okay. I can take this pawn here, that's okay, but a quick check shows that I've got bishop takes pawn on g5. It really only takes a few seconds or minutes scanning the board to see that. So that is a mistake that black really shouldn't have made. And I win a pawn, and I'm also attacking the rook on d8. Black played bishop e7, bishop takes on e7, knight g takes on e7, and finally I played the advance d5. The move I should have played probably 2 or 3 moves ago, and this forces the knight on c6 back. The only square he can move to is b8. So white's a pawn up and has a much freer game. It's true that the white king's in the centre, but it's not in any particular danger because black's pieces are so passive. So I played now queen c2, and I'm not entirely sure why I played this move. I think I wanted to put the queen in line with the black king, and also perhaps provide some support for my pawn on e4, but I'm certainly not sure it was the strongest move. Black then continued with the idea of pushing his pawns forward and played h5. This is a very bad move, actually, and again, this might be a nice time to pause the video and see if you can see what move white should make which takes advantage of this pawn move by black. So I'm sure you would have seen that the move that white has here is knight g5. This is a move that's going to enable next move, or move after, white to play a pawn forward, for example on f3 or h3, winning this trapped bishop on g4. That was the problem with the h5 move. But this knight move, knight to g5, also attacks the f7 square. If the knight gets here, it's forking the rooks and winning one of them for the knight, and that's obviously bad for black. So black can't move one of these pawns forward in order to free up his bishop. He has to do something about the attack on the f7 square. he can move a rook somewhere like that and defend f7. But what he did, quite a good move, I think. He played knight g6. The queen on d7 is now defending the f7 square. Again, I could play now f3 at this point, but I'm not too sure about this knight, so I first of all played knight e6, a nice square for the knight, supported by the pawn on d5, attacking the rook on d8, and black played rook d to g8, and I played then f3. Now at this point the game's probably lost for black, because he's going to lose a piece in addition to the pawn. He's also lost. Black was obviously worried about this knight on e6. It is a very good knight for white, and he played knight to f8, clearly with the intention of exchanging off this powerful knight on e6. But notice that black now has both knights on the back rank. His position couldn't be more passive. So the white king is still in the center, but can sit there quite safely, because there's no danger whatsoever. Black's only hope really is to use these two rooks, which look quite strong on h8 and g8, and push this pawn forward, and basically try and get his rooks active down these half-open files. Because I was wary of that threat, I didn't take the bishop straight away. I can take it later. It's not going anywhere. Instead, I castled queenside, and was sitting there then thinking quite smugly that this was a game that I would win very easily. Black then played pawn c6, and it turns out this is another bad move by black. I could have played pawn takes on c6. So black played pawn c6, and I played pawn takes f5. And I played this because I'm thinking I'd quite like, when the knights exchanged on e6, I'd quite like to get a pawn on this e6 square. So black played knight takes e6, and this turns out to be a very bad move, because white has pawn takes c6, attacking the queen. If queen takes, then you've got bishop takes e6, check, and winning the rook in the corner. If the queen doesn't take, and it takes, for example, knight takes c6, then it's even worse. Bishop takes e6, skewering and winning the queen. So this knight exchange was very bad, and unfortunately I didn't spot pawn takes c6. I played pawn takes e6. Still quite a good move, but not quite perhaps as good as the one I could have made. Black played queen e7, and I now have these two connected passed pawns on e6 and f5. It's time now to take that bishop, cash in. Pawn takes on g4. Black takes back with the pawn. H takes g4. and I then played rook d f1 to give support for this pawn. So at some point I'd like to push this pawn forward to f6, and then I've got this pawn pushing forward an attack by this bishop on the rook on g8. It's all looking very good. Black played, I think, quite a good move. He has to do something. This at least forces the bishop back, and I pulled back to bishop e2. Black then played queen f6. I think he's recognizing that if this pawn on f5 goes forward anymore, he's in serious trouble. That said, the queen's rather a valuable piece to be used to block the advance of a pawn. I then played knight b3. I'm thinking about getting a knight on this c5 square, which would defend the pawn on e6. And black played b6. Maybe a good move. Maybe he's seen this valuable square, and the pawn on b6 prevents me going there. I then played king b1. I just didn't want any sort of nasty check on queen g5 check, and what that might lead to. So I'm just pushing the king into the corner to make it a bit safer. Black played king b7. I then played a5, and black played b5. This is a mistake again. In fact, when black played this move, he asked me straight away if he could take it back, and we were playing an unrated game, so I would have allowed him to do it. But however, unfortunately, there wasn't any facility in the game to enable moves to be taken back. So we played on, and of course I put my knight on c5. Check. And a very nice square for my knight. King c7. Now the knight on b8 is completely paralyzed. It can't move to the a6 square. It'll be taken by the knight. It can't move to this square on d7. It'll be taken by the knight or the pawn. So to all intents and purposes, black is now actually 2 pieces down. I played a g3. I just didn't want this pawn getting any further forward. I didn't want these rooks becoming activated. So I played g3, a defensive move. Black putting pressure on the f5 pawn by playing rook g5, and here I made a mistake. I probably should have played queen d3. Even then, I could lose this pawn because black can play pawn e4, and you can see now the queen cannot defend this piece. But in fact, I played queen d2 and overlooked the fact that this pawn is attacked by 2 pieces and defended only by 1, my rook. And so when black played rook takes f5, I had some concern, to be honest, because yes, I'm 1 piece up, effectively 2 pieces up, but my king isn't entirely safe, and black has these 2 central pawns on d5 and e5, which look a little bit ominous. My pawn on e6 looks now a little bit isolated and could be lost in the future. So at this point I wasn't entirely sure that I would win the game. I played king to b2 just defending the pawn on c3. And black then played e4, and at this point I started to see the possibility of a quick win. I played rook takes rook, queen takes rook, and then queen d4. I'd like to get obviously to e5, but on d4 I'm threatening to take the rook on h8. I think at this point black has to realize that when he moves that rook, he has to prevent my queen coming down here to check on h7. And I'm not sure what would have happened if he had have seen that. But he actually played rook e8, and that allowed me to play queen h7, sorry, queen g7 check. King has very few options. King d6. I then played rook f1, bringing my rook into play, attacking the queen. The queen has to move. I actually had, I think, a better move. I should have played knight b7. King has only one move. King takes pawn, and then bishop g4, winning the queen. I'm sure black would have resigned at that point, but I didn't see that, and I played rook f1, attacking the queen. Black played queen to h5, and then I did play the knight check. King has to take this pawn. Rook f6 check, and the king moved to e5 and then resigned because he could see, I think, that white can play rook f7, discovered check. Black only has one move, king e6, and then you've got queen f6, checkmate. So black resigned after making his 36th move, king e5, and that was the end of the game.